Last year I made my first cosplay build, the Engine Blade from Final Fantasy 15. It was pretty simple, just flat boards cut and painted. For this year's Cleveland Gaming Classic, I wanted to cosplay as Cloud from Final Fantasy 7. I figured there's way less detail on the Buster Sword, so it should be a piece of cake, right? Not quite. For starters, it's absolutely gigantic. Canonically, it's about 5 to 6 feet long, and Cloud Strife is supposed to be around 5'7" to 5'8". Well, since I'm 5'4.5", I decided I needed to scale my sword to be a little shorter so it's more proportional with my body. I say proportional in quotations because, well, it's ridiculously big regardless. Anyways, I started by cutting out sheets of foam board and gluing them onto a PVC pipe, which I used as the hilt. Then I got styrofoam balls for the materia, which are basically spheres of magic that Cloud slots into his sword. For stability's sake, I ran the PVC pipe all through the body, but I can't pop the styrofoam in as is, so I sliced the balls in half with a blade, give them a quick coat of paint, and sand them down into a nice hemisphere. I have to sand them down in the middle to fit with the curve of the pipe. Then I slot them in on both sides to create an optical illusion that is just one green sphere and one blue sphere. After wrapping electrical tape around the hilt and painting it brown, I spray paint the blade and apply white highlights to make it pop. Since I wanted the Buster Sword to actually be able to mount on my back like it does in the game, I got a pair of 25-pound magnets, one for the sword and another that I'd attach to an undershirt. I definitely wish it wasn't so noticeable, but ultimately I felt that its function was necessary even at the cost of presentation. Next, I cut out a thin black pad of EVA foam, followed by a much thicker pad of gray EVA foam to build the shoulder pauldron. Then I used a heat gun to shape it. I had to use an old plastic baseball helmet to get it to curve the way I wanted to. I used more of the thick EVA foam to cut out the nuts and a dowel rod for the bolts. After that, I cut holes in the pauldron, painted it dark blue, and spray painted the nuts and bolts silver before slotting them in. I didn't bother recording any of the process of making his suspenders and belt because it was painfully tedious. However, it was made by cutting out the same thin black foam as the base layer of the pauldron. It also refused to hold with tacky glue or super glue, so pretty much the entire thing is connected by Velcro. I combined the pauldron and suspenders with more Velcro and added white scuffing effects with a dry brush. I love how the scuffs turned out. It gave it a lot more depth. I already had black gloves, so that was nice. But if you thought I hated the suspenders, oh my god, the gauntlet on the left made me want to pull my hair out. I had no idea how to layer that thing. It was just strips and strips of foam and paper, and it always felt like it was going to come apart. The little bolts were a cool effect though. I used small wooden pegs, painted them black, and glued them onto my wrists. It all came together very nicely, and for the most part, I was very happy with how it turned out, especially since I am very much a novice hobbyist cosplayer. But unfortunately, the magnets were so heavy that it weighed the undershirt down, and thus the sword sagged a lot lower than it should have on my back. Now I figured maybe sewing the magnet tighter to the undershirt could have remedied that, but to be honest, it didn't bother me enough to invest any more time into it. This is not a paid endorsement, I'm not affiliated with them, but I used the Jareth Classic Champagne wig from Arta Wigs, and it was fantastic. Highly recommend. I am not a hairdresser, so I brute forced a lot of the styling. I'm sure if I was a professional it would have looked a little more natural, but after snipping a few inches off, plenty of got-to-be glued hair gel, and enough hairspray to melt the ozone layer, I was satisfied. And here's the final look. There were a handful of familiar faces, so it was very cool getting some photo ops with some of my favorite characters, but hands down the highlight of the day was meeting the English voice of Tifa Lockhart, the one and only Brit Baron. She was an absolute sweetheart. She said my costume looked great, we chatted about how much these games and characters mean to so many people, and I got a signed print, which, by the way, shout out to Tyler Hepner, gorgeous work. During an intermission, there was a Final Fantasy pose-off that one of the hosts pulled me aside and asked if I wanted to be a part of. Of course I said yes, and after a tie with Echo from Arcane, I left with the Gunblade from Final Fantasy VIII. Aura farming with a bunch of other Final Fantasy characters on stage, including the real-life Tifa, once-in-a-lifetime experience. This is hands down the most involved cosplay I've ever done, probably taken around a month and a half, maybe 2 months after chipping away on it every few days. I'd love to make more, and I definitely feel a sense of accomplishment after building it myself. Let me know if there's a character you'd like to see next. Until next time.